Thank you for viewing this YouTube archive of a Conscious Consumer Network broadcast. Please feel free to share it far and wide. Check out our weekly broadcast guide for weekly updates on scheduled broadcasts. Help keep us on the air by contributing to our network support fund. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or get in touch via email. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
Television is not the truth. Television is a goddamn amusement park. Television is a circus, a carnival, a traveling troupe of acrobats, storytellers, dancers, singers, jugglers, sideshow freaks, lion tamers, and football players. We're in the boredom-killing business. So turn off your television sets. Turn them off now. Turn them off right now. Turn them off and leave them off. Turn them off right in the middle of the sentence I'm speaking to you now. Turn them off.
Stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army.
Welcome to TLBTV Eradicating Programmed Ignorance, brought to you by Conscious Consumer Network. And before I get started into all the political stuff, we're going to dig a deep hole again today. Let me please tell everybody that we have a voice such as this voice right now going out across the planet to as many people who are seeing this show because of Conscious Consumer Network. Please do me a favor. Don't just watch this show. Go take a look at their program guide. They've got some phenomenal shows. Support them in any way you can. It is because of people like you donating $5 here, $10 there, that we have this platform to get our word out. So we're very appreciative of Conscious Consumer Network. Tonight, we're going to do Science for Sale Part 2. There's two reasons for that. One, there's no way in hell in the first show we could cover everything that we need to cover to show how science has literally been sold in the last 3 to 4 generations. But as usual, I've got people here who can talk about this to a great degree. Last week, or excuse me, 2 weeks ago, we had a very, very good friend of mine and a phenomenal researcher. And of course, that would be James McCanney on the show. And 5 minutes in, after he gave this beautiful intro, he not only lost all internet, but he lost all phone connection and everything. Gee, I wonder if that was done intentionally. And that left David and myself, and of course that would be Dr. David Lewis, to discuss things for the next hour. Today I'm bringing them both back simply because it's not so much the questions that I'm going to ask these two individuals, but the interaction that I would like to see between these two individuals, because they both have two different aspects of Science for Sale to show you or to present to you. Of course, Dr. David Lewis spent 3 decades plus working within the government, within the EPA, also doing work for the CDC and other branches of the government, and doing research for this government, and was one of their lead researchers. And then we have Professor James McCanney, who worked outside of the government, but in conjunction with portions of the government, such as NASA and other portions of the government. But he was basically on the outside looking in. So we're looking at two totally different perspectives, but two lifelong and very globally respected researchers and scientists. So today I want to see more of the interaction between these two gentlemen and allow them to bounce some of the ideas and some of the concepts they've seen and some of the destruction of the credibility of science off of each other. I started off last week, and I'm not going to go through everything I went through on our last show. And again, it was 2 weeks ago, not last week. But when this comes out as a YouTube video, when I republish this, it will have both of the archive shows in it, part 1 and part 2. And what you will see is how well they're going to fit together and the awesome information. But I'll just touch a little bit on what we covered in the opening last week, because I really want to get to this discussion. But what I talked about was, as a child, okay, I partook in things like the Heath kits, the science kits. I mean, the model airplanes, anything that had to do with science as a young boy, and in a lot of cases, up and coming, and even more so today, young girls were extremely interested in science, because we lived in America and we were on the leading edge of science, and we would always be. And if anything was invented or anything was researched, it came from America. We were the biggest, the baddest, and the best, whether it was military, whether it was medical, whether it was space exploration. We might not have started out as the best, but we soon became the best, and we soon led the world. And science had a credibility that was unimpeachable. Today, we can't say the same thing. When those who have a very high position in some of the world's most respected journals, like Nature and Lancet, tell us that less than 50%, and some say over 60% of the publications in these respected journals can no longer be trusted because the science they present cannot be repeated. Let's face it, people, a peer-reviewed journal means that any scientist in your field can take that science and repeat it. And if you can't do that, how can this be peer-reviewed science? It literally cannot be. So science today has fallen on the rocks of credibility. And we have two extremely credible scientists with us today who are going to tell us exactly what they've seen, what they've observed, and without giving you either one of their ages, but they're both older than me, they have seen 3 generations of, and maybe not participated for 3 generations, but they have seen, both of them, 3 generations of the picking apart of the credibility of science. I'm not going to go through their qualifications. I'm not going to go through their bios. That is in the article that accompanies this show. You can see that on CCN's website. You can see that on the Liberty Beacon with the article that accompanies this. They both have phenomenal bios. It's worth going through and looking. Their qualifications are outstanding. And they are both of these gentlemen are science advisors to the Liberty Beacon Project, and we could not be happier to have 2 more accredited individuals associated with this project. So with that, I'm going to bring in first James McCanney to say hello, and hopefully you can stick around for a little while today, James.
Well, thank you, Roger. And David, it's great to be here. I will try to stick around for the whole show this time. But let me just talk about where I was last 2 weeks ago when I was so rudely chopped off. I was talking about Tier 1, 2, 3, and 4 science. And this is extremely important to understand. So let me get out right away. Tier 1 science is the military science. It happens in private companies, locations like Battelle Research, government-sponsored think tanks, private corporations that are government funded, and et cetera, within some universities, et cetera. This is the science you never see. It doesn't get published. It goes up the ladder, and this is controlled by the world bankers because they understand, like all leaders that have been around through history, they understand that information control is paramount. That's why in the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church taught the flat earth concept, because it was a mental prison for the people. It kept them from building a nice ship and going and sailing off to seek their fortune across the sea. Everybody thought they would fall off the end of the earth. And that's the same as going on right now with Mars. For example, NASA goes, well, we'll go there in 20 years. We need billions of dollars a year. Hey, let me tell you something. The military Tier 1 people have already been there. They've been already researching the ruins that are there. They know that there were civilizations on Mars. But the public out here is taught that that's a stupid, ludicrous, ridiculous idea that only people in fairy tale land would believe. So Tier 1 science is the science you don't see. The ownership of water, the ownership of resources, the ownership of the press. All of this comes from that top-down layer. And so what we're dealing with here is we're getting background noise from somewhere. Anyway,
it may be on my end.
um,
I'm in a public building right now.
if you want, mute when you're not talking, David, and just mute
Okay,
the.
good idea.
And then
I'll do
and
that.
then we won't get that background noise. Okay, so tier 2 science is what most people believe is tier 1 science, the top layers of science, etc. So the tier 2 layer is what we might call NASA or the government agencies, etc. The space shuttle going into space, the space station, the Hubble Space Telescope. All these facilities have dual purposes. And by the way, the space shuttle is not the way to go into space. There are much better ways. I've seen them. They do exist. Electromagnetic propulsion systems, etc. So what the public is fed, I call tier 2 fairy tale garbage science that is pawned off on the public. And by the way, this actually counts in the pharmaceutical industry, etc. too, where the people that run the world get much different treatment than, say, the common person. But at any rate, tier 2 science is very important to understand that there's a division of science, and most tier 2 scientists have no clue that there's an entire layer of science above them. Okay, tier 3 science, what's that? These are university professors. I call them textbook repeaters. They have a textbook, they teach a college class, they're respected by their peers. Possibly they publish in some of them may publish in peer-reviewed journals, etc. And then there's tier 4, which are outreach people. Then you have like the glossy magazines like National Geographic, Discover Magazine, Scientific American, the entities, the internet channels, the History Channel, etc. A lot of television, a lot of internet TV. This is tier 4. And what this is all a very top-down structured science. And this is what the public sees. They don't see what's at tier 1. So anyway, it's important to understand this concept. If you go back into history, I don't care, 2000 BC, if there was a ruler there, he understood one thing, that you keep the population dumbed down. They think one thing, but your intel that comes in, the people that you expect, your advisors, have a totally different story. And so you have to keep the populace at bay mentally. That's what's going on today. And there's no difference in science. I was shocked and amazed when I started looking deeper down the rabbit hole we call NASA to find out all kinds of things. And when I started criticizing them while I was on campus, 1979, and I'm at Cornell University, I'm criticizing NASA scientists on campus for misuse of data, fudging data, burying data, interpreting it to satisfy their own pet theories, etc. The obstruction of other work, which I was doing at the time, and just the whole laundry list of basically scientific fraud. And these guys were, I call them scientific vacations. They would fly all around the world on these government aid. They were paid huge amounts of money. They were arrogant, and they thought that if they said it, then it had to be true. That was kind of the mantra of these scientists. But anyway, what they didn't realize was there was a whole layer of science on top of them in the military, which I got to see myself personally eventually because of some of my projects. I was in Los Angeles trying to sell my projects to the military aerospace industry, etc. And before I realized that they were only interested in my ideas, when I told them that I didn't want my propulsion systems, my electromagnetic propulsion systems, I did not want them to be used for delivering nuclear bombs. That's where we had a little bit of difference of opinion, and I got squeezed out. That was the turning point in my career, dealing with the aerospace industry. There again, it was very clear. And at that point, I was in venture capital groups. I was seeing these young guys that were, 2-3 years out of college, moving millions of dollars a day, forming companies, calling up senators. I want money going to this project over here. flying around the world, driving the nicest cars. And I thought, what college did I go to? Man, I missed the boat. Where do these guys get these jobs? Well, these were the kids of the families that run the world, that run the U.S. government. These guys young guys could call up a senator and say, hey, fund this project over here, get the money moving, go through, and this is the channel, Department of Defense here, there, and it ends up in their company over in Los Angeles. These were the people that were being prompted and brought into this international banking system that runs the world wars, that keeps Russia with the same technology as we have, and vice versa. There was an engineer named Andy, I won't say his last name, but he invented the F-14, F-16 Tiger Shark nose. Allowed the F-16 to fly sideways, shoot its guns, and then turn back and fly straight again. It's an aerodynamic concept. But anyway, within months, the Russians had that same Tiger Shark nose on the MiGs at the Paris Air Show. And I'm going, what? What the heck's going on here? This should have been top secret. Top secret. I mean, gives us a clear advantage in air power. And what I realized was this was the balance of power that keeps the bankers in charge.
Wait a minute, hold on one second, James, because this has been seen a lot more recently, because you have, during the Clinton era, you have a lot of transfer of technology to China in the same fashion, in order to maintain that balance, okay, that you're speaking of. And again, what we're looking at is people like Dr. David Lewis, who works his entire life, okay, trying to keep people like you and I safe from being poisoned on a daily basis. His credibility is going down the tubes because of these playboys, these scientists who basically are well-paid playboys and have no real concept of what science is. Yes, I see this, but I think you probably explained it to most people better than I've ever heard it explained.
Well, I saw it from the inside, and so anyway, the whole idea here is that when we talk about science, science is owned. The ownership of science and scientists is owned when we look at government programs, etc. This money is made available, and they spend a lot of money on what I call tier 2 science, the smoke screen. And when you come down to see it, I mean, I go to a meeting, American Geophysical Union meeting, 17,000 to 20,000 scientists there, tier 2 scientists that don't have a clue that there's an entire layer of science above them, of which they know nothing. A good example, I was in a meeting where they were discussing solar wind, solar magnetic properties, etc. And the guy mentions that he always has to send his results up to a military group that analyzes it. And somebody says, what did they tell you about your research on this particular topic? And he said, oh, they never respond. We don't know if it's good or bad, or if they use it or whatever. Ding! This is the division between tier 1 and tier 2 scientists. And these guys, in a sense, know it, but I don't think they have any clue of what's really going on there. But anyway, the issue here is the United States leads the world in science and in technology, etc. The money spent here dwarfs all the other countries put together. So they all are vying to be some part of the United States. And that money I mean, they don't get to publish, they don't get to do anything. Imagine you're a professor in South America or Mexico or Eastern Europe or something, and you get the chance to be on a project using the Hubble Space Telescope. You have, I mean, that's your big shot in life to be something. And so they have them a hook in their nose around all of the world, Japan, the China, in fact, etc. But when you look at the control of this, I wrote an article called Scepter, and it's on the Liberty Beacon page. I advise everybody to look at. And that was related to the show we did November 25th with Randy Maugans, dealing with the control and the scepter is SCEPTER, like the king scepter. The first term there, these are all the things that the World Bankers control. The first word there is science. One of those words, the E word, is engineering. And then there's media, etc. But these are, it's complete control. And none of the E's is for education. So what kids learn as they're growing up has nothing to do with reality. In fact, once you get up and you start at the top level and you start looking down, about 95% of what kids learn all the way up to PhD level couldn't possibly be true, especially in the sciences.
And this is something that I brought up 2 weeks ago when I said we don't teach our children science anymore. But what I'd like to do is bring David in, because you have just spit out a mouthful. And do I understand everything you said? Yes. Okay. I've had these conversations before, not in as much depth and not from an individual who actually walked through it as part of his life. Okay. So I'm really enjoying the way you're putting this out. But David, how much of this do you see and do you understand? Because I hate like hell to put it this way, and I apologize up front, David, but it seems to me that those on your level, those working for the government, those putting their life into trying to keeping people like me safe, okay, are the people getting shit on the most. Have I got that pretty much right, David?
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I'd sort of like to hear more from James about, I look at it like I'm here to learn as much as anything else. It sort of caught me by surprise. I'd never heard this before about the military going to Mars and exploring it and coming back. I have had several friends in the Apollo program when we were making the moon shots, and I interacted a little bit with the NASA Ames lab on the cells program. That's what they call for making a sort of a closed ecosystem for spacecraft to grow their own tomatoes and whatever on the way to Mars. So James, obviously I would say the guys I know in the Apollo program, they didn't know anything about NASA being used by the military to go to Mars. So how does that happen? How does that come about? I'm open to hearing anything I have never heard before.
Well, let's go back, let's say to 1982.
Okay.
First of all, let's go to 1991. Something happened at NASA. Their new leader that was appointed by George Bush was brought in from the CIA, and basically what he did was he put the lid on NASA. At that time, I knew a lot of these people. I mean, not that they all liked me or anything like that, but I was familiar with the Los Alamos group, high energy group. I mean, I was in Los Alamos giving lectures on my work. I was at Goddard Space Flight Center. So I knew these people personally. I could pick up the phone and talk to them. Yeah. And about 1991, all of this came tumbling down. A lot of people left NASA. A lot of people were fired or let go. And it was really thinned out. And the people that remained signed non-disclosure agreements. So this division became very, very sharp in around 1991. In 1982 was when I was in Los Angeles marketing my electromagnetic propulsion systems basically to the military. And this went through the mid-1980s. And basically these are propulsion systems that are non-inertial. They don't blast something out a nozzle of an engine. And so there were two types of systems. One was a passive system, one was an active system that had electric currents going through tubes. I described this in my Atlantis to Tesla, the Colburn Connection book. There's actually a paper that's reprinted from the IEEE that was one of my papers I gave at the 19th International Electric Propulsion Conference in Colorado Springs. So these...
If you could, put this in context for me. 1991, the Apollo program's wound down. I know Merritt Island pretty much vacated around about that time. When was the last moonshot? When did the Apollo program end?
Probably 76.
Uh-huh. So
and then we waited 10 years for the shuttle to get going.
Yeah.
Approximately.
I see.
And then there were the
so
two.
This is the beginning of, sort of back to the beginning of the space shuttle program that we're talking about.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
And so the whole issue is that a lot of technology is held back. There's a strangeness factor here. And you have to understand that the people operating, say, the World Bank, the people that, for example, when Bush Sr. went into Iraq the first time, Saddam's archaeologists had just discovered what they considered was the old Babylon, the original city of Babylon, which contained a lot of scientific artifacts. And so what they didn't show you on TV, which I saw on international TV, was the head of the curator of the Iraq Museum of Natural History sitting on the front steps with his head in his hands. The CIA went in there and took all of the good stuff, was his expression. And he said they knew right where to go, right where to get it all. So they did two things. They raided the museum of Baghdad, but they went out and they surrounded the archaeological area and took it over. Then they went out and, of course, surrounded the oil fields. It was not about little girls going to school in Iraq, according to George Bush. So anyway, that was the key that actually went in there, because they wanted to cordon off that archaeological site. And we never hear about this. They have been excavating in the South China Sea since back in the 1990s. When I found out about it, I mistakenly backed into an internet site, a secure naval internet site, that had them, they're going into the South China Sea with U.S. submarines and excavating artifacts in the South China Sea, etc. And who's this going to? The Smithsonian is instrumental. I mean, we think of the Smithsonian as a museum and we see all this historical stuff, but what they really are is a front for getting all the good stuff, and that goes into private hands. And so the world bankers value this kind of historical information, historical science, etc., far more than they do oil or control of water or wealth or their money or anything else. And so you have to understand when when Carl Sagan comes out and poo-poos talking about certain topics, like say aliens or anything else, that's the public level. They want to make fun of it. They want to, use the term conspiracy theory or anything on this level. They want to make fun of it. They bring on, they create characters, they create actors that make ludicrous the many topics that have serious scientific backgrounds. For example, Planet X, something that I was studying in 1979. Now NASA comes out the other day and says they're going to be in control of the topic of Planet X after denying it for 35 years.
I have a question for you, James. Okay.
Yeah.
I have seen, many, and David, I'm sure you have too, pictures of the surface of the moon, pictures of the surface of Mars that are intentionally smudged over. It's not hard to see where a smudge is put on a picture when you zoom in far enough. Okay, so many artifacts have been smudged out on the surface of Mars. So many artifacts and have been smudged out on the surface of the moon. And a lot of technology today, with photography, has gone far enough where some of this smudging can actually be seen through. What we're seeing on the internet, and I'd like you to speak to this, and I think this is what David wants you to get to too. What we're seeing when these people who have this knowledge on photography are taking these smudges away is what appears to be, you're talking about ruins on Mars. I'm talking about ruins or very large artifacts on the surface of the moon. These must exist, or why is NASA putting these smudges all over these pictures. So
Well,
can
let
we
me
hear a
say-
little bit more about this?
Yeah, let me say something. First of all, NASA doesn't own any of the cameras on any of its equipment.
Right.
There's a company called Malin Space Incorporated out in La Jolla, I believe, California. They have owned NASA cameras all along. And so anything that you see or is filtered through, and by the way, NASA has a lot of misinformation programs that try and divert public or make it silly or make it stupid. And so a lot of the things that you see are really planted misinformation pieces that then later can be pointed out as being fake. All of this misinformation is going on. But in the reality in the background is that there is a lot of tier one science that is being kept from the public. So that's just the reality.
Hey, James, let me ask you a question.
Yes, Dave.
One of the engineers working in the Apollo program told me a very interesting story. I wanted to see what you thought about it. Remember the Soyuz mission where the Americans and the Russians joined up for the first time in space, and Americans for the first time got to cross over and look at the inside of a Russian spacecraft. And this engineer from NASA was telling me that we were shocked to cross over because with the American spacecraft, weight is everything. We try to keep everything very light, and it's expensive, to put a pound of mass into outer space. So when they crossed over to the other side, they were shocked to see a great big oak desk with a cosmonaut sitting at it. We wouldn't think of putting that kind of weight into outer space. So is that something that the engineer made up, or?
No. The Russians had tremendous lift capability early on. I have a section on my webpage. It's in the picture of the day section. That we have YouTube videos and pictures of what was called the Cosmos craft. It was a little shuttlecraft that they started using back in the 1960s. They had over 1,200 manned flights with that because they had so much lift power on the Energia brand rockets, the big kerosene lifters, that they actually put this extra little shuttle up on the nose that carried 3 guys. And they could go up and do missions and orbit the Earth and come back down in and land. And the picture I have on my webpage is from a YouTube photo that I got from in Russian source. I worked with Russian space scientists for a number of years back in the mid-90s. And also their shuttle program, they had a big shuttle program going on long before we had a shuttle. And they canceled it because it was just obtuse. It was too expensive. But their big boosters are immense, and they can roll these things out. While we were waiting for the Apollo program to get going, they had thousands of people in outer space. They have tremendous lift ability. They still do. They went around the moon and came back, and what I understood from these Russian scientists was that the people came back very dead, that they sent around the moon just to orbit the moon and come back. Because they had the capability, they had the ability to be in space for long periods of time. And the Russians had a very different tack to doing things. Everything in the United States was with, like a valve would be run electronically or et cetera. The Russians, if you look inside a Russian spacecraft, it was all balls. Everything was a ball, a globe. And they had manual valves. And so when they needed more oxygen, they just opened the valve a little more, et cetera. But they had tremendous lift capability, and so putting things in.
They used and still use, I guess, kerosene and oxygen, not hydrogen and oxygen.
Right.
I've heard the reason for that is that NASA just liked the idea of hydrogen because the universe is built on it. I always wondered, what is the real reason that we use hydrogen and Russians use kerosene?
The main use of hydrogen is once you get up in thin atmosphere and out in outer space, kerosene is hard to light. So in the atmosphere, kerosene works beautifully, and it's cheap and very available. And so they just initially made these massive rockets. And if you looked at them compared to, say, the Saturn V or something, the Saturn V is still a major league rocket. But they always had the capability of lifting a lot more, and they could go off every day. They were literally launching sometimes twice a day.
Yeah. Let me ask you one other question, something I've wondered about over the last couple of years. An experience my wife, Kathy, who's sitting over here, and I had driving home one night. On a country road, I looked up and I saw what I first thought was a meteor entering our atmosphere. But I was going slowly. As I watched it, it broke into hundreds and hundreds of pieces and was just crossing the sky. So we stopped. And I knew exactly what it was. It was a very large satellite or spacecraft of some sort breaking up. And it lasted probably, what, Kathy, maybe 5 minutes? She doesn't know, but I'd say 5 minutes. You know, it was not a meteor crossing the sky. So what I did, I went home and started Googling around through NASA's information to look at all of their satellites that they keep track of them, and they make that information available to the public when they enter the atmosphere and burn up. And this was not there. It was traveling from east to west, which I believe indicates a Russian satellite. Don't they go opposite of the way we launch? Or
the Russians have orbits all over the place.
I see.
Yeah, so, and there's an issue that the U.S. uses because they have lower power rockets. That they use that because they're closer to the equator. They use that extra velocity from rotational velocity of the Earth. They add that into it takes away from the amount of fuel you need. The Russians were launching in all directions. It didn't matter. They had so much power.
So what I was looking at, which NASA does not identify as a Russian or American satellite because they map both of them. I must have been seeing a re-entry of a military satellite, I assume.
It could have been, yeah, if it indeed was a satellite breaking up, and that's what they look like when they come apart. They start to literally come apart in pieces, and that's what you see, like a streamer.
Anybody who believes that we are aware as civilians as tier 27, when you're talking about tier 1, we must be on like tier 100, that we are aware of everything that is orbiting this planet. We are probably aware of maybe 10%. And is it true that there's a virtual junkyard orbiting this planet as we speak?
Yeah, that's one of the real crimes of the space programs, especially the United States, is all the junk that's up there. It's literally when private enterprise goes up there finally and starts using space, that's a big problem. It'd be like driving down the highway on this beautiful new highway with stuff flying into your windshield every 5 minutes, and you're driving like this to avoid it. Yeah, space is a big mess. And they have computer programs that track this, but it's they've brought bacteria to other planets. NASA has really had a very poor record of conserving outer space, vastly polluted around Earth. They've brought bacteria from other places back to Earth. They don't have any way of quality control. They shouldn't be bringing back they discovered nucleotides and other viruses in the tails of comets. They bring that stuff back to Earth, and the spacecraft crashes in the middle of the desert. They go out there and pick it up and bring it back to the laboratory. What a bunch of idiots. Excuse me, but talk about science bad science. That's the epitome of it. But anyway, possibly we're getting a bit off point here, talking about the corruption in science. But I would put, in fact, the outfit that I'm most familiar with is NASA, since I worked in the area of space science, astronomy, and astrophysics.
Hello?
Yeah.
You didn't freeze up on us, did you?
No, I just stopped talking. I thought
well,
you'd wait for
you
a comment.
stopped talking, and it's like, oh my God.
James
Well,
is gone again.
anything else, David? Because I really want the interaction between the two of you today. I don't mind being here to play an occasional traffic cop or to throw in an occasional comment, but I really want this conversation between the two of you because you are two preeminent lifelong researchers. So this is very interesting. Please keep it going, gentlemen.
Well,
I would like to talk about, David, I'd like to talk about revolving doors, but go ahead with your comment.
Yeah, obviously you can tell by now that I have had a long-standing interest in NASA, and I've wondered about corruption in science, what form it takes with NASA. There are fundamental questions that I've got. For example, why in the heck did we ever get involved in the shuttle program? We should know, the American public should know, the world should know well by now whether or not there are microorganisms on Mars or Europa, some of the other moons of Jupiter. We've had the technology to go there, gather the samples, and bring them back here. We know plenty of places where there's ice and water. Mars has got caves on it that you can see evidence of gases coming out of there that indicate microbial activity. Why have we spent all these years putting space shuttles up at that expense and running high school science fair projects on them? I suspect that the military knows by now whether there's life on within the solar system in these areas where obviously I would think you'd find it there.
David, you answered your own question. Nothing has happened, really. If you look at the science, so-called science that has come out of NASA over the decades, we certainly haven't gotten our money's worth, and they certainly have not pursued outer space. The space shuttle was a vastly expensive program that got us nowhere. Now they had to dump it. We have no launch vehicles of any kind, and now they're talking about NASA. The only program they have going is to go to Mars in 20 years. You know what's happened? Nothing. And that's the point. That's the entire point. The entire point of NASA was to use up all the resources, keep a little bit of fairy tale science splattered around the television on the evening news every now and then, and everybody supposed to go, gee whiz. Every time people go down and watch that shuttle go off, I think, how ridiculous. That is not the way the military is going into outer space today. That's the smoke.
I totally agree with you, James. And I mean, it's become crystal clear to me. They're spending tons and tons of money and letting decades go by and not doing anything useful. And if I can see that, surely scientists all over the world are wondering what's going on with NASA. So why are they spending all this money spinning wheels?
Well, that's
and you're talking about the tier 2 scientists. Okay, give us a little bit of a peek into what the tier 1 scientists are doing, or tier 1 science is doing in outer space or with outer space.
Okay, in tier 1 science, they don't use rockets, they don't use jets. Jet engines are still useful, rocket engines are still useful. But in anything related to Earth, electromagnetic propulsion systems are the way to go. If you want to field with electromagnetic devices, and that's what I was working on in 1982. And I mean, I'm standing there with the military in the meetings, They stole my work because I didn't want them to be used for delivering nuclear warheads. But on the level of what the public gets to see, and remember, there is a collusion between international so-called powers. All of these outfits, China, Russia, all belong to the G20. When you see the picture of the leaders of the G20 meeting, these are the leaders of the world that are controlled by the bankers, the same International Monetary Fund banker outfit that runs out of the front layer of the Vatican. That's exactly what's going on. They manipulate these like puppets, and all the news media reacts, and we're supposed to fear Russia, and then we got Iran. We've been in 5 wars in the Mideast, and there's 2 more on the way. You know, and all of this interaction is all marionettes playing on puppet strings. NASA's job.
So it's choreographed, is what you're saying. This is all
choreographed. And I've been in meetings where there are people that come in from other countries, and they're all just good buddies. When I was in venture capital groups in Los Angeles, 1982, looking for funding, you had Arabs, you had Jews, you had Christians, you had people from Ireland, you had all these people working together, and they were in the families that ran the operation. I estimated at the time there were 5,000 people in the world that operated the finances that ran all the military. Roger, you were in the military, and when I saw this, there's vast amounts of money that's spent in the military.
I worked for the DOD. I ran emergency response teams. Not only was I in the military, but I serviced their programs on a global level. I've got over 1.5 million air miles under my belt. So yeah, I saw it, but I didn't see it from the perspective you saw it from, okay? Because a lot of this, although I'm aware of it, in a shadow world, I never had any of the details.
You were compartmentalized, and that's what the whole...
The military-industrial complex is the most compartmentalized entity on the planet. You know that as well as I do.
Right. And if anybody working for NASA or any of those groups ever gets an inkling of this, you know what? They don't talk. They just keep collecting their paycheck, and their hope is to keep the kids in college, get the house paid for, the wife happy, and get to retirement so they can move down to Florida and Gulf. That's what's going on. I always said that throughout history, scientists should be at the forefront of what we're doing, the voice, because they're supposed to be honest, they're supposed to be intelligent. How few people are there like Dr. David Lewis that have made it through as independent scientists? When I go to American Geophysical Union meetings, I have a badge. Everybody gets a badge, and it has your affiliation on there, and I write independent scientists. And I don't know how many people have come up to me and they go, "What's an independent scientist?" and I go, "That means I fund my own research. I do all my own work." And they look at me like, "You are a man from not Mars, Pluto, or beyond. That couldn't be." And this one woman asked me, she had just gotten her PhD. She said, "How can you operate without government funding?"
Now, David jump right in here, David, because the last time we did the show 2 weeks ago, what you discussed was exactly this, okay? If you're going to get funded, this is what you've got to do. Here's the strings, that get jerked around. Here's what, if you want funding, you've got to say this, you've got to do this. You've seen this, David, firsthand. I mean, you lived that for, 3 decades plus?
Yeah, I tell you, Roger, it's sort of funny. On my book cover, the original version of it, not the one that actually hit the presses, but I had a little section on there that said something along these lines: the government hires scientists to support government policies. Industries hire scientists to sell and protect their products. Academia, universities, they hire scientists to bring in grants from government and industry because they use the overhead from that money. That's evident from this one observation. You work for the government and you don't support Doesn't matter
So
what you're doing, who you are, how good a scientist you are, you're gone.
are you and James enigmas?
Oh yeah, yeah.
I would say so, yeah.
When I was at
Because, and
Cornell,
I'm proud
Well,
to be
let me
associated
finish,
with
Roger.
both of you.
Roger, let me finish my story
Go ahead.
here.
Go ahead.
If you work for industry, if you criticize their products in any way, you're fired. The same happens in academia. If you don't bring in grants, big grants, you don't get tenure. So any way you look, government and industry control who gets hired as a scientist, who gets to work as a scientist. That one of the first people to review my book was a professor at Harvard University, not just any professor, but the vice provost for research. And I sent it to him to see if he would comment on it. And we talked about it. And he said, I can't read this book. And I said, why not? And he said, he referred to information like that. And he said, I cannot read past 2 or 3 pages of this book, period. He would not do that. Now, that same individual, vice provost for research, I was on a panel with him at Harvard in 2011. He sat right next to me. And after the session was over, and most of the session was taken up in a room packed shoulder to shoulder with professors from Harvard, from MIT, from Boston University, from Tufts University, who just standing room only. And when I talked about this subject, that my book deals with, that is government control of science, the whole conference just sort of moved in that direction, and that was what everybody wanted to talk about. Well, when we had a break, I was standing there talking to a couple of professors in the School of Medicine at Harvard, and this vice provost for research walked over and stuck out his hand, and he said, I just wanted to shake your hand. I've heard about you, never gotten to meet you. I just wanted you to know that I really appreciate all you're doing. And that's sort of how that conference went. But when he saw my book, Science for Sale, that was the end of it. He would have nothing to do with me. At the conference, he told me, he said, if I was 25 years younger, I would do exactly what you're doing. I would just dive into it. And so I thought I'd found a real good colleague there. But it's a different thing when you deal with the things like James dealing with, you're dealing with here, I'm dealing with it. That's a subject that can't be discussed.
Well, I've got to jump in. I apologize, David. We're down below the 5-minute mark. So what I would like to do at this point, and I'll toss the football over to you first, James, take about a minute, go through anything, any parting shots, any last message you would like to put into people's minds, James. Then we'll go to you, David. And then, of course, I'll get my last 2 minutes. This is the first time I've ever done a show where I talk the least out of anybody on the show. And you know what? The audience is probably saying, let's do that again real soon. But please, please, James, jump in there. Give us about a 1-minute wrap up. Is there any final parting shot you would like to leave in the audience's mind on
absolutely
the sale of science?
Absolutely. The CIA is the police force of the World Bank. And they now have gotten into science in a major way. They own Google, they own Facebook and Twitter and all of the social media.
Yes.
Google just put $1 billion into SpaceX, Elon Musk's so-called private space program. And now Elon Musk dropped his lawsuit against the government, now has launch capability for military contracts. And so we see the CIA, private corporations that are starting to merge with NASA, and only they get FAA approval. Other private corporations, we saw the 3 private enterprises, including Richard Branson's SpaceX space program with accidents in the rocket stage. They are being hit by weaponry to destroy these private space programs and prevent them from getting civilians into space. This is very dangerous. And I'll turn it over to David.
Well,
now.
Would you say energy weapons? Real quick answer to that. Energy weapons on these private attempts that have made them fail? Directed
Oh,
at,
absolutely. Yeah.
okay.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I figured. And yeah, I pretty much came to that conclusion too. Please, David, about a minute to wrap up, my friend.
I think all I'd like to add to what James has said is, from my perspective as a microbiologist, I wanted to go into, I wanted to work for NASA. That was always my dream. And it's been such a disappointment over my lifetime. I can see so clearly what I could have done at NASA and many other microbiologists, and how far ahead our understanding of the solar system and beyond would be if scientists were turned loose at NASA. If you go and look at my book, Science for Sale, towards the end of it, I talk about NASA, and I recommend people take a look at that. That's near and dear to my heart, that whole subject.
I would say that I strongly recommend both of your books, the books that you guys have published. They're in your bios. Please go take a look. It tells you where you can find the books. It tells you the titles of their books. Both of these gentlemen have written outstanding books. We're going to do this again, gentlemen. We are, simply because I actually enjoyed the living hell out of this conversation, and it needs to be done again. You two are very dynamic together because you come from things, you talk about the same subject, but you come at it from 2 totally different directions, and it makes for a great conversation. I want to thank you both for being here. I want to thank you both for being contributors to the Liberty Beacon Project and advisors to this project. You helped to make it what it is and what it's soon to be, and everybody will be finding out what it's soon to be very soon. But where the Liberty Beacon Project is going, a lot of it is because of the 2 gentlemen we're talking to today. You'll find out more about that within the next couple of weeks. For everybody listening, please, one more time, go to Conscious Consumer Network. Please. It is because of outstanding platforms like CCN that we have the ability to get this type of a word out, because you're not going to hear a show like this on mainstream media. It's not going to happen unless they make a real big faux pas, and I don't think that's going to happen. But both of you, please accept my absolute humble, this is just phenomenal. I enjoyed the hell out of today. And for everybody listening, thank you for listening to the Eradicating program, Ignorance, on Conscious Consumer Network, TLBTV. And please have a pleasant evening. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for tuning into CCN. This unique network is dedicated to free and independent media. CCN was created with the belief that information is the common heritage of all beings, which is why our live stream high-definition broadcast is easily accessible and free to view. If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Having produced over 1,000 shows in 2015, which are all archived on YouTube, we look forward to bringing you more groundbreaking, cutting-edge information in 2016. For more information on what is on, please check out our broadcast guide for weekly updates. CCN broadcasts in multiple languages and features some key voices of our challenging times who are all in pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world. CCN belongs to you, the people, and it is up to you all to keep this network on the air. Please contribute to the Network Support Fund or visit the CCN shop. We thank you all for supporting free and independent media.